For Missouri Democrats, tomorrow is Judgment Day. After leading the Show Me State for most of its existence, voters will decide if the last two Democratic statewide officials remain in their posts. If U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill and State Auditor Nicole Galloway prevail, it could provide a jolt for a party seeking to rebound after the disaster of 2016.
By the way, I'm so proud of you guys because you know what they thought? They thought this was going to be easy. They thought because Donald Trump won this state by 20 points, this was going to be a done deal. They never even dreamt they would be having to do what they're having to do at the close of this campaign to try to take back Harry Truman's Senate seat.
But if GOP Attorney General Josh Hawley is able to topple McCaskill and Saundra McDowell is elected auditor, it could be the surest evidence yet that once purple Missouri is now deep red.
They've never accepted this president as legitimate. They have never accepted the will of we the people. And that's why on November 6th, we've got to make our voices heard. We've got to tell them that we were serious. We've got to tell them that we meant it. We've got to tell them we want our country back.
On the pre-election edition of Politically Speaking, Joe Mannies and Rachel Lippman joined me to look at the burning questions that will determine who succeeds and who fails on the November 6th ballot. We also talked with Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft about turnout expectations and the impact of part of a photo ID law being struck down.
Thank you for listening to this podcast, brought to you by Lufuse Alfa Romeo, offering test drives of the Alfa Romeo Giulia, the 2018 Motor Trend Car of the Year at Lufuse Alfa Romeo in Fairview Heights.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today is
Rachel Lippman, a reporter at St. Louis Public Radio.
And
colleague Joe Mannies.
And it is the day before the November 6th election. Everything that we've been talking about for our entire lives leads up to this moment.
And writing about.
Our entire lives. That goes back to like kindergarten.
No.
I wouldn't go that far.
No.
Last 6 months, sure.
No, I mean, yeah, last 6 months, I'd say. Maybe the last year. I mean, I was writing about Claire McCaskill and health care in October 2017, so I guess that's at least 13 months.
Well, you get a blue ribbon and a gold star for that, Joe.
Woohoo!
Before we talk about the things to look for, I talked with Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft about the expectations for turnout and the effect of the court ruling of the Missouri photo ID law and the effect on the coming election. Here's a few minutes from that interview. What are the expectations for turnout on Tuesday, and how do you think the state's election authorities are prepared to handle what could be a very busy day?
You know, I think we're looking at turnout anywhere from, our estimates so far were right around 52, 53%. I would see it being anywhere from 45 to 65%. As I've been traveling the state, I've probably talked to 20 or 30 election authorities in the last 3 weeks, meeting them in their offices to make sure things are going well. And there's a lot of excitement for this election. I don't think there are going to be any concerns with the election. The only concern that I have is that people educate themselves on the issues. We have in St. Louis County, I believe they have the longest ballot they have ever had. And the longer the ballot is, the longer it takes people to vote it. So we want to encourage people to educate themselves about what will be on the ballot, to know how they want to vote before they go, so it'll be a quick and easy process for them.
Yeah, the long ballot in St. Louis County has gotten a lot of attention because the lines for absentee voting have been, around an hour long. And I think that the reason for that is definitely the length of the ballot. Do you think election officials there are prepared to handle a large influx of people and potentially long lines because of the length of the aforementioned ballot?
I think they are. The election authorities I've talked to, they're putting out extra little cubicles for people that are doing the paper ballots. They're trying to make sure that there are more spots for people. But the election authority, we can move you through the process to where you get your ballot quickly, but once you get your ballot, that's your time. And we really want to be cognizant of that. But if the people would help us by reading what's going to be on the ballot. Before they get there, they can get a sample ballot. They can go ahead and fill out that sample ballot if they want. So when they go to vote, they already know what they want to mark. It will move more quickly for them. But if there are long lines, it's going to be because people are taking time as they're filling out their ballot. And that's really a choice that people have to take that time, and we don't want to be hurrying them. We want them to make the best educated decision that they want to make.
Now, one of the things that I think has probably given your office a headache and some of the election authorities a headache is the court ruling involving Missouri's photo ID law. How do you think that election officials are handling the change in procedure that was brought up by that decision, and what message are you sending to Missourians in the wake of the shakeup of that particular law?
Well, clearly we should never have unelected, unappointed by the governor judges that are changing the way we run elections 13 days before the election. That is just asking for trouble. And it's unfortunate that judges would not listen more to the people that actually run elections to make sure that they go smoothly. But I will say that the local election authorities, we've been in constant contact with them throughout the process. I'm continuing to meet with them. They're ready. One of the things that we had to decide was when that decision came down 13 days before was what was our next step. And we will fight that after the election is over. We will continue the legal process because it was clearly an erroneous decision. But we said, you know what? We have to make sure that what we're doing is what's best for avoiding confusion and will work best for the voting public on Election Day. So we said, we're just going to go with that decision for now. We're not going to continue to fight that right now because we want the people to have a calm, simple Election Day. And that's what they're going to have. For voters, what they're really just going to see is what we have said has been true since June of last year. If you're registered, you can vote. If you have not already voted absentee and you're registered on Election Day, you can go to your polling place regardless of what you might read in other news organizations. St. Louis Public Radio will get it right. But you will be able to vote, and your vote will count. If you have that government-issued photo ID, use that. If you have that secondary form of identification, that bank statement, that utility bill, you will be able to use that. If you show up and just have the shirt on your back and the pants on your legs and you're registered, you will be able to vote a provisional ballot. Just get out, make sure your voice is heard. We'll take care of making sure the law is appropriately enforced after this election with legal challenges, but we're just making sure that the people of the state have a good experience on Election Day.
I'm not sure how often you personally check Twitter or social media. My guess is probably not much, given that you're very, very busy. But there have been some Democrats who have criticized your office for not being aggressive enough of talking about the changes of the new law. I want to give you the chance to respond to that, obviously, because you shouldn't be able to not respond to criticism, obviously.
Yeah, heaven forbid. It's October and Democrats are criticizing Republicans. That has never happened in the history of the world. Look, it's the silly season of politics. I am saying the same thing that I have said since June, which is the message that the people of the state need to know. If you're registered, you can vote. And if someone has a problem with me telling the registered voters of the state of Missouri that they're going to be allowed to vote and their vote will count, then I don't think that's a problem with me. I think that's a problem with the individuals that don't seem to want registered voters being told they'll be allowed to vote. We've tried to keep it as simple as possible. If people have concerns or questions, we have a toll-free number, 866-868-3245. A live individual will talk to you. But as far as the people of the state need to know, as long as I'm Secretary of State, if you're registered, you'll be able to vote. And why can't we all just agree on that? I mean, I understand we may not be able to agree on the color of the sky or, somehow we can't always agree whether or not the Cardinals and St. Louis are the best fans in baseball. But we ought to be able to agree that if you're registered to vote, you can vote.
What is my final question for you today? What is your general message to voters, especially in places like St. Louis where turnout could be high, lines could be long, but the stakes are very, very high no matter what the race is?
This is how your voice gets heard. I go back to Lincoln talking about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And if you want a government of the people, people have to educate themselves on the issues and get out and vote. I know that there's a politician, at least one, that's probably disappointed all of us at one time in our life, and we're not always happy with how they've acted. But the vote is how we make a difference.
We're now going to look at the things to look for that could be determining the outcome in Tuesday's election. We're going to start with the granddaddy of them all, the biggest race in the state of Missouri, the St. Louis Recorder of Deeds race.
Where Michael Butler is running unopposed for that office. So, that's a big deal.
My love for Deeds, it will never die. We're going to talk about the U.S. Senate race, which is legitimately one of the most competitive races in the entire country.
Yes.
Between Claire McCaskill and Josh Hawley. So the first thing I think we're going to be looking for is, did Hawley make the right choice tying himself to President Donald Trump? I've been saying this for months, that unlike other Republicans who have been trying to run away from the president and his policies and his words, Josh Hawley has done the opposite. He's appeared with President Trump multiple times, most notably in Columbia last week. And by the time you hear this podcast, he'll be appearing with him in Cape Girardeau on Monday.
And with Mike Pence on Friday in Kansas City last Friday. So, so 3 times with representatives from the White House in 5 days.
So he has clearly made the decision that being with Trump is better than criticizing some of his things, as other Republicans do. And not only has he attached himself to Trump, he's attached himself to some of Trump's decision, including judicial nominees. This is what Hawley had to say last week, criticizing Claire McCaskill on voting no on Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court and how he feels it changed the dynamics of this race.
Oh, I think it's made a huge difference. I mean, I think it has opened people's eyes to the agenda of the Democrat left, what they are willing to do to seize power, and how they have never accepted the results of the 2016 election. And it's also opened people's eyes to Senator McCaskill. You know, she says that she hopes people realize she didn't have anything to do with it. She had everything to do with it. She voted no on Justice Kavanaugh. She's been wrong on every single Supreme Court justice since she has been in the Senate or running for the Senate. And, she was always there for Obama. Where is she for Missouri?
I've heard a lot of anecdotal anecdotes, Joe.
As opposed to non-anecdotal anecdotes?
Yeah. That the Kavanaugh hearings may have provided a jolt to Republicans and may have united kind of a fragmented Missouri GOP. You've probably heard the same thing, I would assume, right?
Yeah, but I think it did in the beginning. But hey, I mean, that was light years ago. That was September. I mean, that could have been like 100,000 years ago in politics. I mean, when there's big news out of Washington, out of Trump's mouth every day. So while I think it did probably provide a jolt of electricity to kind of help align many Republicans. Now, again, we're talking about the Republican base here, the base where the judicial nominees reshaping the courts has been objective number one for several years. That's one of the reasons that some religious groups and others who, on the surface, you would think they would not be with Donald Trump, were with him as soon as he got elected because of the promise to reshape the courts. So Hawley's comments are sort of in line with that. But my question is, after that excitement of a few weeks, I think voters have kind of moved on. I think even some in the Republican base, there's other issues that I think, maybe needed to be talking about, but he hasn't.
Rachel, what do you think?
That was my question, too, is how long of a tail does this Kavanaugh nomination have? It's over. We're in November already. I think people have moved on, as Joe was saying.
Obviously, Hawley still feels it's a ripe topic because not only is he talking about it a lot, he brought Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina to Missouri last week. And this is what he had to say about the Kavanaugh hearings' effect on the Republican base, both in Missouri and nationally.
The big thing to me is how it unified the Republican Party. We've had our differences. I didn't vote for President Trump, but he did win, and I want to help him where I can. The bottom line is that whether you're a Bush Republican or a Trump Republican or just anywhere in between, what you saw you didn't like. President Trump picked the most qualified person, I think, of his generation, Brett Kavanaugh, who worked for President Bush. And I've never seen a backlash like I've seen here. They overplayed their hand. They've united Republicans, and I think a lot of Democrats didn't like what they see.
I will say this. McCaskill really didn't have much of a choice because her progressive base would have pretty much abandoned her. But I think that what the Kavanaugh thing did also was really energize women, progressive women, potentially some women who are the independents who are deciding which way to go. And it became not so much about Kavanaugh, but the way Dr. Ford was being treated. I think that it did galvanize a lot of women against the Republicans, concerned about the treatment of her, and it got a resurrection of the Me Too movement. I think some people are ignoring that. Now, we won't know until Tuesday how that plays out, but if what I saw at the Biden rally was all these women show up, and many of them I interviewed did mention this.
Well, let's talk about McCaskill, because I think that I've been saying for months that this is not the Missouri that McCaskill won in 2006. You look at the map, she won some rural counties outright, and some of the other places she got 40 and 45%. Those are some of the areas that Donald Trump won by 80%. And the reality is she has a three-pronged strategy, and my question is whether it will pay off. The strategy is as follows. She needs to get a large turnout and overwhelming victories in St. Louis and Kansas City and St. Louis County.
Yes.
She needs to win in suburban and exurban areas like Jefferson, Platte, Clay, and Buchanan counties, or she needs to tie. I don't think she can win this election if she loses those counties. And she also needs to hold down Hawley's margin of victory in those aforementioned small rural counties and traditional Republican strongholds like Greene and St. Charles counties. If she does not do all those three things, I think she loses. Rachel.
And I think this is where the sort of answer to that first question, will Hawley end up helping Trump, is actually yes, in that those deep red counties that went for him in 2016 by huge margins, seeing their candidate support Hawley in that way, I think doesn't allow Claire to keep down those margins enough in those rural areas. I think that was a signal less about, Kavanaugh, less about anything, and just about kind of Trump himself being in Missouri.
So I asked McCaskill herself, how are you going to piece together this geographically and racially diverse coalition in order to win a third term?
Well, it's hard. This is because you do have to have the enthusiasm of voters who are Democrats, but you also have to have the trust of voters who don't view their decision through a political lens. And so I've got to emphasize what I get done. I've got to emphasize that I'm not afraid to compromise, that I'm not afraid to say I'm a moderate, and I've got to hope that every voter looks at the contrast on some important issues like healthcare, dark money, workers' rights, minimum wage. If voters look at that contrast, I think we'll be fine.
We talked about in the last question about the positivity of being with Trump. Former Vice President Joe Biden talked about maybe some of the more negative aspects. The fact that there's been racial and religious attacks over the last couple weeks, and in his view, President Trump hasn't been forceful in condemning them enough.
A series of explosive devices mailed to a bunch of us and to the media. Cold-blooded murder of 2 African Americans in a Kentucky supermarket. And then the worst anti-Semitic attack in our nation's history, 11 Jewish worshipers killed in a synagogue I know well in Pittsburgh, where 2 of my friends belong. Folks, we need to recognize words matter.
Joe, you were at that rally. What do you think Biden's words means for the overall election?
Well, I think he is kind of bringing it back to the key point. McCaskill has made an intentional decision not to bash Trump that much. And so she's avoided saying much about some of the focus on his behavior, some of the focus on some of the things he says.
And some of his policies. She was quoted on Fox News saying she supports putting troops on the border for the quote-unquote caravan. That's like 1,000 miles away from the United States right now.
I know, and there have been some Democrats who have condemned her for that or criticized her for that, saying that wasn't necessary. She didn't need to go there. But I think, though, that what Biden was doing was trying to say, look, here's the climate that we're dealing with. We need to address this. And I think he was kind of in some ways pushing her and other Democrats to while not get too caught up in the weeds, to at least acknowledge that. And I think that it definitely generated a lot of reaction in the auditorium.
I think Claire's McCaskill's kind of bigger issue is that she has to run on a record. Hawley doesn't really have a legislative position record. He can put himself, on any side of the issue that he wants to be, whether it's supporting President Trump, whether it's saying I will protect pre-existing conditions while also suing to eliminate the law that protects the insurance coverage for pre-existing conditions. And he has the ability to point to something that Senator McCaskill's done and say, see, I have proof that she is against X, Y, and Z, and therefore against Missouri. Attorney General Hawley doesn't have that.
One short point that I have not mentioned yet, but I do want to make this. Hawley's campaign, this will be intriguing. If he wins, I think it also will underscore how a Republican running statewide does not have to do much campaigning in the St. Louis area at all. I don't recall one single event that he did inside 270. And usually Republicans running statewide do a few. Some of it's just for show. But to pick off some voters in the inner suburbs or even in the city, Roy Blunt used to do that a lot. So that is intriguing to me, because if he wins, and he could very well win, it will show that the Republican path to victory is through the base, rural Missouri, and the exurbs.
So let's move to a district that takes in parts west of 270, and that's the 2nd Congressional District, which takes in parts of St. Louis, St. Charles, and Jefferson counties. Congresswoman Ann Wagner is facing off against Democrat Court Van Ostrin. Frankly, Joe, while we have interviewed candidates for this race in the past, I don't think we would be covering this race to the extent that we have if Court Van Ostrin, A, hadn't raised the amount of money that he's raised, which is pretty much unprecedented for a Democrat in the 2nd District, and B, the importance of the 2nd Congressional District on the U.S. Senate race. So
yes.
The question I'm going to ask is, will Wagner or Van Ostrin deliver the votes for the Senate victor? So the 2nd Congressional District is a Republican district. It was drawn to have a Republican congressperson. Just because that's the case doesn't mean it doesn't have large pockets of Democratic voters. And I think a viable candidate like Court Van Ostrin has energized a lot of those Democrats to not only vote for him, but potentially McCaskill.
I think the message would be that people are tired of politics as usual. They are tired of politicians that are bought and sold by special interests, and they are ready for representatives who are willing to work hard, to show up, and to be true public servants by being present in their district. And I can't imagine a better message that could come out of November.
When we talked with Wagner on the Politically Speaking podcast, she emphasized that she was not taking the challenge from Van Ostrin lightly.
We've hit over 200. My campaign alone, with this groups and this infrastructure that they've invested in, have now made over 234,000 voter contacts. That is the new number where we are, 234,000, and that's both phone calls, doors knocked, postcards sent out. I just gave a rally and motivated the troops the best I could, telling them that it's go time. We're 3 weeks out, and it's time to most people have made up their minds, and we need to make sure that we keep that intensity up.
You've known Wagner for a very long time. I know a lot of Democratic activists and voters in the 2nd Congressional District do not like her for various reasons, but it cannot be denied that she's probably one of the savviest and most experienced political strategists on the Republican side.
Yes.
So how do you think the fact that she is, going full bore, spending a lot of money on ads and organization, how do you think that's gonna stack up, especially for the Senate race?
Well, what she's planning on is clear, because she's not doing hardly any public events. She's mainly focusing on phone banking, mailing, ads. She is focusing on getting the base out because, as you just said, 2nd District, the numbers lean on Republicans. So she feels if she gets those people out, she's fine, no matter what Van Ostrin does. She is by far the most aggressive Democrat she's ever had, but I think she's pretty confident that with the game plan she has, that she will be victorious. Now, she is not. I think she figures whatever she gets does help Hawley, but that's not her focus. The focus is on her. For Van Ostrin, whatever numbers he gets, whatever additional Democrats he gets, whether he wins or loses, that is extra votes in Claire McCaskill's pocket.
Well, that was the point I was going to make. I don't think that Wagner is as important to Hawley as Van Ostren is to McCaskill.
Yes.
The progressive base doesn't particularly like McCaskill. We tolerate it because it's a D. We tolerate it because it's not Hawley. But I don't know that they get excited about her. Van Ostren is someone that they can get excited about and, get out to the ballot and say, all right, I will vote for McCaskill because of the letter, but I am voting for Van Ostren because he is Van Ostren.
So let's move on to the other statewide thing on the ballot, and that's the auditor's race. As I kind of predicted, the auditor's race hadn't gotten nearly as much attention as the U.S. Senate race, which is not shocking.
It's a little hard to break in on the airwaves and anything when,
And that's kind of one of the points that I wanted to make. In a traditional Missouri politics sense, Nicole Galloway has raised like about $2 million, and Saundra McDowell has, I don't even think, broken $100,000. In let's say 10 years ago, you could probably predict that race was going to end up 65-35. Regardless of how good the Republican candidate was. There are no such expectations in this contest because of the U.S. Senate race's poll on the auditor's race. And who better to explain this than a former down-ballot statewide candidate, Missouri Republican Party Chairman Todd Graves.
Those down-ballot races, unfortunately, you work your tail off and you feel like you're making a dent. And, win or lose when there's a big race at the top of the ticket, don't take it too personally, because the truth is you're in a tractor beam. And, if you think spending $1 million the last couple of weeks of election when the national forces are spending $30-40 million in the media on something else is going to allow you to cut through, it's just not. And so if we're fortunate enough to win that race, which I feel reasonably good about, I think a lot of it's going to have to do with the kind of turnout. If we change what the electorate looks like, if more Republicans turn out, then we'll get more Republican votes all up and down the ticket.
Because of Hawley's actually influenced by President Donald Trump and his appearance, that could help McDowell in a close contest. The fact that she doesn't have a lot of ads on TV may not matter if there's a big Trump wave that helps Hawley. It could take her across the finish line, too.
I think it goes back to what we saw with the Kander-Blunt race back in 2016. I think you can make the argument that it was Trump that pulled Blunt across that line. A 19-vote victory pulled 19-point victory. Thank you. 19-vote would be a little bit different. 19-point victory pulled Senator Blunt across that line. And I wonder if that happens here in a GOP race where arguably the candidate hasn't made much noise, hasn't made much of an impression, but you're voting less for the candidate and more just for the letter after her name.
As I said on the previous shows, major political implications from that. Go listen to both Auditor Galloway and Republican Saundra McDowell's Politically Speaking podcast. You'll be glad you do. I want to move down to the legislative races. And I would say in the St. Louis area, it's a little sleepier than, say, 4 years ago because Jill Shoup's run for re-election is not going to be competitive. The Republican opponent has raised literally no money. The 22nd senatorial district race in Jefferson County is competitive, but not really to the level of 2014 when both candidates raised like close to $1 million. There are about 4 Senate races across the state, including that Jeffco race, including one in St. Joseph, including one in Springfield, including one in eastern Jackson County that are getting some notice, as well as some suburban House districts. This is what Missouri Democratic Party Chairman Stephen Weber is saying about expectations, because there's been a lot of talk about the quote-unquote supermajority, but in his view, it's not as important of a benchmark as it was, say, when Jay Nixon was in office.
For the supermajority, the point of the supermajority is the ability to, when Nixon was governor, that they could just override his veto. So for me as chair of the party, obviously it's important that we pick up seats, but I've always been more concerned about building the right structure and the right habits. Rather, not just trying to get out of the supermajority this year, but doing it in a way that's sustainable. Because, as you pointed out, even if we were to get out of the superminority, it's not like Mike Parson is going to be vetoing a whole bunch of Republican bills and there's going to be overrides or whatever.
Joe, what do you think would be a good night for Democrats when it comes to the state legislature?
Maybe if they pick up a couple, and I don't even know if they even have a chance of that. Maybe it's just being the status quo. I think that their ambitions for the General Assembly right now, frankly, are probably pretty limited.
If it's status quo, that's a huge victory for Republicans, in my opinion. I think a good night for Democrats would be picking up about 10 House seats and maybe winning 2 or 3 Senate seats.
Yeah, but do you think that's a possibility they can do that?
I think it'd be challenging. On the House side, I think that they're probably going to pick up a few seats, but the problem is that Republicans could pick up a couple seats in Jefferson County and possibly one in St. Joseph. As far as the Senate goes, those 4 seats I mentioned are not the easiest districts for Democrats to get. I think that a lot of the candidates in those races have been pretty strong and have been raised a lot of money. So I think a lot of that will depend on how the McCaskill-Hawley race goes. Because I go back to 2006 when McCaskill won by 2. That was the year that Wes Schumeyer won a highly competitive seat in Northeast Missouri, which is also up for grabs now and is not competitive, by the way. And when Frank Barnitz was able to hold on to a Rolla-based seat, which I think the Republican is favored in that contest. So it does kind of show that the map was a lot different back then, that they were aiming for very rural seats.
Well, and you also had the stem cell debate, which was huge, and I think that may have been one of the reasons that McCaskill won, and that may have helped some of those legislative seats as well, because it was such an overwhelming issue, and it generated a lot more attention than anything else, I think.
I think what struck me the most about Chairman Weber's comments was the structure and habits, and I wonder how much that last race we talked about, the Galloway-McDowell race, if Auditor Galloway loses at the state level, at the statewide state level,
right,
that knocks a Democrat out of a statewide office.
That means there's none.
It means there's none, and it's that much harder for them to gain any kind of relevance, and I think derails any help that the structure and habit building that Chairman Weber is trying to do. Even if McCaskill hangs on, we're talking about sort of the state-level infrastructure.
Well, never say never. I'm sure after 2004, when Republicans won a lot, they were thinking they were going to rule forever, and then 2008 rolled around. So let's move to Illinois for a second. A state that I used to live in, a state that I make fun of all the time. So I think I can say this freely because we're not covering the Illinois governor's race. I think Bruce Rauner is going to lose. I think he's going to lose by a lot. All the polls say so. He has alienated both Democrats and social conservatives. And I don't really think it's much of a leap. I mean, 538 says there's a 99% chance J.B. Pritzker wins. The question is going to be the margin. Mm-hmm. And if the margin is large, the question I have is, will that end up sinking somebody like Congressman Mike Bost, who's running against Brendan Kelly in the highly competitive 12th congressional district race, which I've covered pretty extensively.
Which is good. I'm glad you have.
Yeah. And Rachel, you have actually covered Illinois politics professionally. How much do you think the millstone that is Bruce Rauner could affect a race like the 12th district, where Donald Trump is still popular there? Mm-hmm. Mike Bost is, I think, a really good candidate who I think works hard and has, attacked Brendan Kelly pretty mercilessly. But Brendan Kelly's a good candidate too, which has made the race so compelling. What do you think the effect of the governor's race is?
I think it's going to be less about voting for Pritzker and more about finding a way or vote against Rauner. Excuse me. It's not so much that they like or support Pritzker. It's that they don't want Rauner. And it's not going to change their view of the Republican Party as a whole. So they may split their vote and vote for Pritzker or Sam McCann, the Conservative Party candidate, and then vote for Bost down ballot because there's a split between sort of the national Republican and the state Republican at the level. So I don't know that he's that much of a millstone because it's the state versus national Republicans. And again, like with Hawley, you do have Trump going. I think he'll be in Carbondale this weekend, or was in Carbondale.
He was in Murfreesboro. Last month.
So a sort of a southern Illinois area. And again, it's that signal. It's saying if you support Trump, then you can support Mike Bost, and Rauner is sort of cut out of the equation there.
Now, I actually was asked Pritzker a more far-sighted question, because if Bost hangs on and also Rodney Davis holds on in his competitive race and Pritzker wins, it gives Illinois Democrats a possibility of basically merging the two districts, especially if Illinois loses a congressional seat.
Because of redistricting.
Now, as I've said many times, Illinois is one of the few states in the nation where Democrats have gerrymandered congressional and state legislative districts to help other Democrats. And there's really no real way to change the system. You would have to have the Illinois legislature put a constitutional amendment on the ballot, and good luck getting Mike Madigan to do that. So I asked J.B. Pritzker, who has talked about how he doesn't like gerrymandering, if he got a map that helped Democrats, what would he do? This is his answer.
I will not sign a bill that is gerrymandered. I have been for independent maps for a long time now. I really believe that we got to have more fair elections. I want to limit terms for leadership in Springfield, but I don't want to limit terms for our legislators. I think if you've got a good legislator and you like them, you should be able to reelect them, but they should be in districts that are fairly mapped so that you have real choices if you're a voter.
So you would stand up to someone like Mike Madigan if he tries to create a state legislative or congressional map that helps Democrats?
I will stand up to Mike Madigan.
Rachel, you covered Mike Madigan. Do you believe Pritzker will actually stand up to him, especially if national Democrats are pressuring him to sign a map that's going to be more favorable to Democrats?
I think he can stand up to Madigan in the sense that he is not as financially dependent on Madigan's operation as perhaps other candidates have been, and the way that Madigan can sort of move Democratic money around. Yeah, there's no doubt that Mike Madigan is an incredibly powerful politician, but when you are a billionaire like J.B. Pritzker, you don't need the money. But I know we're talking about Illinois here, but I'm going with show me.
Yes.
You know, he can say anything he wants right now on the trail when you're leading with 16 to 20 points, but show me.
It would be the same thing if I asked that to Mike Parson and he said the same thing. I would be like, you know what? National Republicans are gonna pressure you to sign a congressional map that's going to help Republicans. And that pressure is immense.
Yes.
Let's not kid ourselves. So let's get out of Illinois bubble. We could talk about that forever. Let's talk about a couple ballot initiatives and talk about Mike Parson. Mm-hmm. The main thing that Governor Parson has done thus far in the campaign has stumped for Proposition D, which is a gas tax increase that will eventually lead to more money for transportation projects. But when he was Lieutenant Governor Parson, I asked him during a Politically Speaking podcast about a transportation issue, not only because I asked him, he actually wanted me to talk about that issue and went on to say that not only did policymakers have to support something like a gas tax increase, but they actually had to go on the stump and campaign for it. I think that Governor Parson has followed through on that. This is what he had to say to me a couple weeks ago.
We're going to promote that. Me and myself as the governor, I'm going to promote it. The main thing I want to do is make sure the citizens are well aware of what the circumstances are if we do and if we don't. And I think that's my job to promote that and to make sure people understand that. Because I really believe if people really want Missouri to move forward, the public out here, I think they're going to find that there is a need for that, and I hope they support it in November. But, you know, that's going to be up to the voters to decide that.
So, Rachel, you wrote the story about this. Mm-hmm. If this ends up passing, and there have been efforts to increase transportation funding for a long time that have been unsuccessful.
Yes.
Including in 2014 a sales tax increase. Do you think a lot of credit will go to Parson and to some extent Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe?
I think it would provide them a cover. I think it provided legislative Republicans when they voted to put the referendum on the ballot some cover to say, you know, hey, we're just asking people to vote on this and the then Lieutenant Governor is supporting it. I think it gives some Republican voters a little bit of cover to say, look, you know, if a conservative like Mike Parson can get behind this, then I can get behind this as well. It's less about him really campaigning for it and more about kind of the cover for individuals.
Now, Joe, I follow a lot of people on Twitter, and former Senator John Lamping has just been mercilessly criticizing Parson and Kehoe for supporting this tax increase. He kind of represents not only the former Eric Greitens loyalist, because he was a big Eric Greitens supporter, but kind of the more conservative side. I don't think that there was much organized opposition to this. There clearly was some opposition to it. But should Parson be concerned that some on his right flank are criticizing him for doing what he's doing?
I don't think so. Well, for one thing, you got the Missouri Chamber, which is out big for the proposition, is out campaigning for it. And in fact, they've been kind of playing down their opposition to some other stuff in order to make sure that they promote the gas tax. So I think that there's enough cover for Parson. He also has been making sure that he crafts it in such a way, as far as his sales message, that he's appealing to a lot of rural voters saying, look, your roads are bad. Look how bad your bridges are. You can't get your stuff to market. You're having trouble with this and that. Your school buses are in danger. He's kind of framing it in such a way that I think makes it a pretty popular issue in outstate Missouri, and that's what a Republican has to do.
Now, before we go to the last question, I have noticed there has been some progressive angst about the fact the money goes to the highway patrol. My understanding is it's going to the highway patrol, and that frees up money for other transportation projects.
Yes.
But still, I follow Twitter and Facebook. I've seen a lot of progressive-y people say that they're not going to vote for it because of the way that's structured. What have you heard, Rachel?
I think you're right. That is one of the threads of opposition to this, but that's, again, a structural thing. It is written into the Missouri Constitution that the state patrol is funded out of the road fund, which is where this gas tax would go. And the explanation that Proposition D people give is that if you dedicate the increase in the sales in the gas tax to the highway patrol, it therefore frees up what you were getting on the 17 cents to roads and bridges. And there is an argument to be made that, why does the patrol need funding to keep increasing and stuff? Well, I mean, costs of working, costs of living do go up. You can argue whether that increase does need to happen, but it segments off that 10% increase to go to the highway patrol so that the base 17 cents that we already have goes to roads and bridges.
So now we'll talk about the marquee ballot initiative. Bingo.
I don't know if anybody even remembers that it's on the ballot.
Yeah.
I always thought bingo was a dog. It ruined my childhood when you told me it wasn't.
There have been other outlets that have written about that ballot initiative. I believe the Columbia Missourian had a really good article. So read that.
This is Amendment 4 we're talking about.
Right.
But what I was really talking about was Amendment 1, which is known as Clean Missouri. So it kind of goes back to what I had to say about the auditor's race. The pro-Clean Missouri side has a lot more money than the anti-side. They have tried to piece together a racially and politically diverse group of supporters, including Reverend Starsky Wilson, who was the co-chairman of the Ferguson Commission.
What I knew was that the policy agenda that Deaconess Foundation desires for children in this community, to advance justice and equity for youth, to advance access to quality early childhood education, to advance access to comprehensive health care, to assure family economic mobility, was not going to make it through the kind of legislative construction and the process of lobbying and influence that we currently have. And so we've got to change the conditions and the environment in order to be able to advance policy that will be responsive to the needs of people.
So just looking at, again, the raw numbers and the coalition, you would think that Clean Missouri would have an easy chance of passing. But it also is one of the few initiatives on the ballot, with the exception of Amendment 3, one of the marijuana initiatives, that has organized opposition. And they do have a little bit of money. And a lot of the opponents are primarily Republican elected officials and activists, as well as rural organizations like the Missouri Farm Bureau.
And some urban African Americans.
That's what I was going to say. Unlike some other ballot initiatives that almost were defeated by primarily rural entities, such as the Stem Cell Initiative and such as the Dog Breeding Initiative in 2010, there are some prominent African American political figures like Congressman Lacey Clay who are opposing Amendment 1 because of the redistricting portion. They feel that it will dilute black political power. Other opponents, like soon-to-be former State Representative Courtney Curtis, had this to say about the proponents' desire to have competitive districts on the House and Senate level.
Sure, I want more Democrats as a sitting elected Democrat currently. But the question is, what type of Democrats will we get also? By wanting to add more Democrats to the fold and in elected office at the state level, we could potentially get more individuals like a Bob Burns or like a Jeff Rauner. Those are individuals that vote against our interests and that don't come to bat to work for our community. And if that's what we get through Clean Missouri, then that is not a Clean Missouri I can support.
When you look at some of the opposition, the pieces may be there to where it could potentially fail. I'm not saying it's going to pass or fail, but what do you think?
Well, I think if they'd gotten more money, I mean, there had been some rumors like a week ago there was going to be some major donors that were going to give some money so they could do more flyers, because ballot issues don't face some of the restrictions, financial restrictions that candidates do. but apparently that money hasn't been forthcoming. But so I think that the problem for the opponents is that they haven't been able, I think, to get their message out in a huge way. I mean, like you say, there are all these opponents, and there are different groups who are mentioning different things, but it's all fractured. And so there's not there's not like big news conferences where there's 30 people on stage saying, you got to vote against this. So I would say that the conventional wisdom is, unless they've been more successful than I think, and I could very well be wrong, I think that it's going to be difficult for them to knock off clean Missouri. I think the opposition just did not get organized soon enough.
I would agree with that. I think it's a complicated ballot measure, but the way you can campaign on it is as simple as the name, Clean Missouri. Who doesn't want to, clean up politics? It's an appealing, short message, and for people who aren't wonking out on it day in, day out, it's appealing.
Now, what I would not be surprised happen in 2019 is for the Missouri General Assembly to put something else on the ballot that has something appealing paired with, if you don't fund the demographer that will end up drawing the House and Senate lines firstly, then the old redistricting process goes into effect. That actually was proposed last cycle. I think it'll be much more serious if this ends up passing.
Well, because I think some opponents had been relying on their belief that this was going to get tossed out by the courts and it would never end up on the ballot, and they lost that bet.
Final thoughts, Joe.
Okay, as I mentioned before, I think a lot of this is going to show in the Hawley McCaskill race whether or not there has to be or needs to be a new dynamic on either side for how they win statewide elections, because that could have impact on other statewide races down the ballot for a long time.
Buckle up.
My final thought is we have been through a hellacious year in Missouri politics, and as some people on both sides of the aisle have pointed out, the resignation of Eric Greitens really showcased the need for voters to study candidates and issues very closely.
Yes.
And not just rely on ads in order to make a decision. We have a lot of podcasts and stories that you can listen to before you make your decision. So please vote, but also be informed about how you vote, because I would say that we always say this is like the most important election cycle of our lifetimes. I'm not going to be that hyperbolic, but the choices that Missourians make in this election will likely determine the political destiny for the foreseeable future. So vote and be informed. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me at Jay Rosenbaum on Twitter. Follow Rachel on Twitter at
R. Lipman, 2 P's, 2 N's.
Follow Joe on Twitter at
Jay Mannis. It's JMANNIES.
We'll be back on Wednesday to wrap up the election, so check your iTunes for that.
Sponsored by Lou Fuse Alfa Romeo of Metro East.